he talks about how he was over, I don't know how many Satanists, call them churches. He was like the bishop.
You gotta be kidding me.
What was in her heart? You don't know what sin she'd committed. You don't know how much unbelief was there. You don't know whether she hated her husband.
I don't think so.
Why would anybody spend so much time ranting and raving about something that they don't believe in?
Really?
Welcome to Skeptic's Brew Pub with Brother Brewer. And welcome to episode 44 of Skeptic's Brew Pub. I am Brother Brewer, of course, and tonight I've been working on this for a couple of days now, and I'll tell you, this has really given me a good appreciation for why people get suckered into a lot of this woo bullshit. Sitting in, this was a 29-minute, according to my recorder, a 29-minute little spiel that this lady did. And it took me so far, I've gone 7 hours now researching to get the sources to debunk the information that she gave. I mean, it was just that good. They did that good a job of mixing in the science with the bullshit. And so even for somebody that's a little well-versed in this kind of thing, I've been in the medical field for a few years, going on 20 years, not as a doctor, but I've done, as a corpsman, I did quite a bit of medical stuff. And I also have been working in medical offices and such for going on 20 years now. So I'm familiar with some of the things that she brings up. And honestly, they throw in just enough stuff that it's really hard to separate the truth from the fiction. I'll just put it that way. I guess I could give you guys a little bit of a history of, since this was a chiropractor's office, but chiropractors, naturopaths, homeopaths, natural medicine practitioners, all of these guys follow along much the same kind of lines. Chiropractic was started a little over 100 years ago. There was a guy that worked, I can't remember his name, but from what I remember from Steve Novella's explanation is that this guy was a janitor in, I think it was a medical school, and he was also interested in the human body, and he came up with this theory that of course, this whole thing about the nerves in the spinal column, everybody was learning about how nerves work, and so he came up with the idea that all of the ailments in the human body could be cured or were caused by blockages between the pathways and the spine and the spinal cord. And so a lot of these blockages would happen via bones, subluxation, or these blockages would happen and they would need actual physical adjustment or subluxation to free the energies coming from the spinal column or from the spinal cord, from your center, going out to whatever ailed you. And so they have this big, long list of, these particular areas of the spine. When you crack them or manipulate them a certain way, or the hips a certain way, it's going to release energy that'll go to this part of the body. It's very, very woo. So anytime that, it's a lot of chiropractors, it's still a part of their practice, but a good chiropractor won't bring it up as much. Now, that was 100 years ago, and what happened was that this gentleman decided to go ahead and experiment one day, and he did some neck manipulations on another guy there that was another person there that was deaf, and so he cracked his back, and the person could hear again, and thus the practice of chiropractic was born. Long story short, nowadays what we've seen scientifically, actually measuring it, people, it does have some good effects when it's talking in the ways of physical therapy type things, where adjustments, maybe someone is a little bit out of, yes, their spine might be a little bit cockeyed, and it does help they found that it does help with acute pain, not chronic pain, but acute back pain. And it's about as effective, maybe a little bit less effective, as going to a physical therapist and doing exercises and such through a physical therapist. But that's the basics on chiropractics. It's a lot of this. The problem I have with chiropractors isn't so much the manipulations to help with the back pain and things like that. Although there have been quite a few instances of chiropractors not adjusting the neck properly and actually causing a pinch or a damage to arteries in the neck, the carotid arteries, and causing patients to have a stroke. Most recent one was a 33-year-old Playboy playmate that went to have this done, and a couple of days later she had a stroke and died, left behind a kid. So, it's not really something to mess around with. I really wouldn't recommend going unless you've exhausted all other options, and even then, go only for the back pain. Don't go for the bullshit. A lot of things that this lady is going to talk about, this chiropractic doctor, quote unquote, is going to talk about in here, do have a basis in real science and real medicine, but they've taken it farther than it needs to. So let's go ahead and get this started. This was a local ADHD seminar. It was, like I said, it was about a 25-30-minute presentation that she gave on helping your kids with ADHD without medication. Now, this piqued my interest because both I and my son have ADHD. We're both being treated with forms of Ritalin. His is Concerta. Mine is just Ritalin LA. And so I know a little bit about ADHD. I've done a lot of research into it, reading the scientific journals, reading things from doctors like Dr. Kenny Handelman and a few others. And I think my Audacity just froze. Nope, we're back. So I have a basic grounded understanding of how ADHD works and what the mechanisms that are involved with it. And I'll be honest, this lady goes off the rails. She also talks about using it to cure autism. Not happening. So, but let's go ahead and listen to her speech. Any doctors out there that are listening, if I miss something, please, by all means, let me know. We'll do a follow-up for it. I probably would even bring you on to talk more about this and about why some of this stuff is so dangerous. But let's go ahead and take a listen.
We obviously have an integrative office, which means that we have chiropractors, physical therapists, medical doctors, and we practice lots of different types of medicine. One of the things that we're going to talk today is about our functional medicine program, and specifically how it relates to healthy children. So, thank you for coming.
Okay, let's stop right there real quick. I want to define what functional medicine is, what she's talking about. She's going to describe it. Well, I'll let her describe it. Never mind. We'll let her describe it, and then I'll give you a little bit of a rebuttal.
With genetic variance, that means that we've had a small change to our DNA. And by the end of this is going to be something that's brand new. It's going to be something that the medical community is not really talking about right now. And so it's going to sound strange. And I know some of you are going to be skeptical. But
okay, warning bells number one. Anytime that an organization or a person tells you that whatever they're doing, the medical establishment isn't really looking into it, this should set off some warning bells. Right off the bat, this should set off some bells. Because if the medical establishment isn't looking into something right at the moment, that means there's probably not a link. So, but let's let her continue with it.
I'm going to show you why it works. Okay? This presentation has really been driven around talking about ADD, ADHD, and spectrum disorders, but this can apply to any type of child, no matter if we're just trying to increase their health, if they have eczema, if they have acne. So this is a way to improve their health, but this workshop is really tailored toward ADD and ADHD.
Okay, warning bell number 2, cure-all. They start making fantastic claims about being able to treat multiple things that aren't necessarily related. It's kind of like the if you remember the commercials from way back in the day when they would talk about like the Vegematic. It slices, it dices, it makes julienne fries, it does this, it does that, it does this and that, and you get it, and it doesn't really do much. Really doesn't do everything as well as it's supposed to. Kind of along those lines, this is basically a snake oil approach that we can cure you of this disease. We got this one. We've got a handle on how to fix this and that. I mean, and especially they start talking about treatments when it comes to ADHD and autism. What she says about that, well, let's listen.
More than 1 in 10 U.S. children is diagnosed every year. That number has dramatically increased over the last decade. In the late 70s, that was really not even something that they had ever heard of, was ADD, ADHD. So there's 2 things happening. It's either on the rise, more and more kids are developing it, we're starting to recognize it more often, or we're overdiagnosing.
Okay, and of those 3, a lot of people like to say that it's being overdiagnosed, and they use statistics from the information from 20 years ago to back this up. And I'll be honest with you, from the experiences that I've had with my own physicians, or with the pediatrician that we took Eli to, who diagnosed him. It's not just a simple matter, oh, your kid's not paying attention. Well, shit, he's got ADHD. He's being rambunctious. We'll put him on some medicine. They don't do that, okay? Reputable, good doctors are not going to do this. That's why I say when you have a kid that you think may have ADHD, take them to a specialist. Talk to the pediatrician. If the pediatrician does not have a lot of experience dealing with ADHD, ask him to send you to a child psychiatrist. Someone that is versed in treating ADHD, because they're going to be up on the latest research on it. The diagnostic criteria for ADHD and for autism has gotten a lot better over the years. I mean, yes, it's still a lot of clinical diagnosis where you have to look at the symptoms, but they've learned so much more about what to look for, what factors, what certain triggers or behavioral patterns or whatnot that you're looking for the symptoms for these things. So diagnostic criteria has gotten better, and it's not that there is an epidemic of it, and it's not that it's being overdiagnosed so much as it is. The diagnostic criteria has gotten more precise, and we've gotten better at recognizing it and understanding what it is. So let her continue.
Okay. There's an autism prevalence in the United States, 1 in 68 births. 1 in 68. That's pretty scary. Okay. A couple of years ago, it was 1 in 100. 10 years ago, it was about 1 in 1,000. Is it really on the rise? Are we overdiagnosing, or is something else going on?
Notice she skipped the diagnostic criteria has gotten better again here in that second part about the autism, and everybody's afraid of the autisms.
The prevalence of autism in U.S. children has increased by 119% from the year 2000 to the year 2010. Are those good statistics? Okay, what is going on? So there's something called the disease tree.
Oh, this is fun. This is where we start getting into the ideas behind the functional medicine.
Think of the leaves as the presenting symptom. I have eczema, I have acne, I have GI disorders, I have autism, or I have some sort of spectrum disorder. Okay, right now, as a whole, the medical community is treating the leaves. Okay, we're plucking one of them off. We're treating the GI issues, we're treating the acne, but we're never taking a look at the trunk, the whole body, and the roots underneath.
Okay, so this is the idea behind functional medicine, is that the way that she talks about it with this health tree is that GI issues, celiac disease, eczema, acne, autism, ADHD, appendicitis, chronic back pain, all of these things are not individual diseases. They're symptoms of a bigger problem within the body. That doesn't really make much sense. Now, when you think about it, the way she's saying that they treat the whole person, both body, physical, mental, and emotional, yes, that does make sense. And some of the things that functional medicine talks about do make sense. And she's going to maybe talk about some of those there. Changing your diet to eat more healthy, exercising more, staying away, stopping smoking, don't drink too much, don't do these things that we know now are dangerous to our bodies. Functional medicine does go into that, but then they get into a lot of the woo too, and we're going to hear a little bit about that here.
What's driving the disease? What's feeding it? Okay? We have an increase of environmental toxins, of physical trauma, of nutritional deficiencies. No one's looking at the natural causes of these things that are feeding the disease. So another way of looking at it is that we're just chasing the symptom. Make sense? Okay, are we working on preventative medicine, or are we working on reactive medicine? I'm sick.
Sounds pretty scary, doesn't it?
So I get an antibiotic.
Yes, if you have a bacterial infection, you get a fucking antibiotic. You don't go worrying about, well, maybe if I take more vitamin C, then I won't have to take the antibiotic. No, if you have a bacterial infection, you treat a bacterial infection with an antibiotic.
That's the classic example. But we're chasing symptoms. We're not treating what's feeding the disease. Usually there's an iceberg analogy. The tip of the iceberg is what we can see above the water. That's the symptom that they present with. We're not looking about what's going on underneath. The genetic component to it, the environmental component to it, and the physical trauma component. So the Human Genome Project started many years ago. It's how we've seen...
Okay, now we're jumping from treating the symptoms to the Human Genome Project. Very interesting kind of switch there.
Sequenced our human DNA. They've also found that certain genetic pieces, little tiny pieces, make proteins, which make enzymes that then decide what we present with clinical symptom-wise. You guys following me?
Trying.
So the entire reason why we have DNA is because it encodes those proteins, which then encode enzymes that control the speed of chemical reactions.
I'm going to have to look in on that. Hang on just a second. Okay, that's what I thought. She's running it a little bit backwards here. The DNA is actually... the replication of the DNA happens through enzymes that are composed of RNA and DNA bases. Not necessarily, it's not that the DNA creates the enzymes. The enzymes help replicate the DNA. But so that's one spot where she and I are going to have to agree to disagree on. But let's keep going here.
Enzymes are those proteins that can either speed up or slow down chemical reactions.
That much is true.
The molecules at the beginning of the process are called substrates. The enzymes then convert those into products.
DNA. And break down.
Almost every single chemical process in our body is controlled by an enzyme.
True.
Can you imagine that if one enzyme is messed up, that chemical reaction does not work correctly? It's either too fast or it's too slow. Now imagine that 15 of those chemical reactions are messed up. How do you think our body's ability to detoxify itself, to repair itself, is affected?
Well, that kind of depends, because when you're talking about enzymes being messed up, that's on a cellular level. We need to get a little bit further than the cellular level when we start talking about massive changes, I believe. Again, if I'm not right, please correct me, and I'll give you that contact information a little bit later.
So this is one type of chemical reaction in our body. It's called the Krebs cycle. It's how our body produces energy. Has anyone ever heard of the mitochondria? Mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. If you've ever done any of your home research, you've probably stumbled upon mitochondria as the root of some of these diseases. If we can't produce energy from fat, our body doesn't work correctly. This is the very first step that can be messed up. Each one of these is controlled by an enzyme. So, we all start our lives with some sort of mutation. Mutations is nature's way of making sure that our offspring are actually healthy. Some mutations are vital, but some mutations can cause unwanted symptoms. Our body's inability to detoxify itself, our body's inability to repair itself.
Okay, now I have to jump in here. First of all, you notice she keeps talking about toxins, detoxifying. Now, I'm going to say this once, and I'll probably butt in and mention it again just to reiterate this. You have a detoxification system in your body. It's called your liver, and it's called your kidneys. They filter out the bad shit. They get rid of the toxins in your body. If you are having issues detoxifying, then you definitely need to go see a specialist, because more than likely your kidneys or your liver have a serious problem, and you might need to be put on for a liver transplant in worst case scenario, or you might have something along the lines of hepatitis or something else that damages the liver. But if you have a healthy liver, if you have a healthy lymph node system, and if you lymphatic system, and you have a healthy urinary system with good, strong kidneys, you're going to be able to detoxify yourself, okay? You do not need this detoxifying bullshit.
We also acquire mutations as we go through life.
True.
So, has anyone ever heard of free radicals?
Yes.
Or antioxidants?
Yes.
Both of those things keep our DNA from being damaged, creating a new mutation over time.
No, the free radicals cause the mutations. The antioxidants help to keep those free radicals at bay. She got herself a little mixed up again there, but that's understandable. However, I do want to point out that what they've discovered in the last year or two is that overloading yourself on these antioxidants can actually be detrimental to you. Upping your vitamin C a little bit is okay. Upping maybe a little bit is okay, but overloading it like that is not going to do any good, and you're just going to wind up peeing most of that back out, because your body, through your own digestive system and its own metabolic processes, creates antioxidants that do these things and help get rid of those free radicals. You don't need these heavy antioxidant things. And especially in cancer patients, they've discovered that antioxidants actually feed cancer. But let's continue.
So DNA affects our health. To function correctly, each cell depends on thousands of enzymes to do their job. Control the rate or speed of chemical reactions. Okay? Those mutations can affect our health by preventing those proteins from working correctly. The protein can malfunction or be missing entirely. And then that protein will play a critical role in the body. It will disrupt normal development. And then eventually, if it goes on long enough, it will cause a medical condition. Who was diagnosed with autism at birth? Probably no one. Does it happen around 3, 4, 6?
Okay, here's where she's fucked up again, but let's let her finish.
6, 7. Okay. So usually we develop normally, we're doing okay, and then we get toxic load. We get birth trauma, we get, time and time again that these cells are unable to do this, and then the symptom or the condition starts to present itself.
Bullshit. Bullshit, 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 bullshit. Okay? The reason you don't diagnose autism in babies very much is because the diagnostic criteria for babies, it's very hard to diagnose them with autism. There's studies from years back where they've seen that you have certain indicators that your child might have autism that you can see in infants. Okay? It is not this bullshit of the toxic overload or whatever the hell she wants to say it is. No, it's something that happens from birth. Okay? If your kid is going to be autistic, it's already done by the time the child is born, okay? All this toxic load bullshit is just exactly that. It's a load of crap. Don't buy into it. The reason I'm saying that, too, before I let her go on, is because you hear about this toxic overload stuff and people wanting to get rid of this, and that's where stuff like MMS comes in. What is MMS? It is industrial strength bleach. Now, I know a lot of people don't know what it is. I didn't even know what it is. Of course, I don't have a child with autism. But there is this quack that right now is living somewhere in South America because he's going to get prosecuted if he goes anywhere else in the world. But he's selling this. It's a water purification. It's concentrated bleach. And he is selling this, calling it this cure-all, especially for autism, and selling it as an enema. Yes, he's encouraging parents to pour pure, concentrated bleach up their kid's ass to cure their autism. And parents are doing it. You can go on forums all over the place and see this, where they talk about, they can see that these worms or whatever, these toxins, they can see them coming out in when the kid goes to the bathroom. Of course they're seeing that. That's their fucking intestinal lining. You're killing your kids. That's why I am so pissed off about this with the toxic overload talking about autism, because it leads to bullshit treatments like this, and it makes parents think it's their fault, and it's not. Shit happens.
Is this making sense to you guys?
No, not at all.
So we're all defective. Between
that sounds
5
like a
and
Christian.
10 potentially deadly mutations in our genes. Every single one of us. This is why we have 2 copies of our genes. Our body's ability to copy the good gene that keeps us healthy and alive, it's always going to do that one. Until we get too much toxic overload, too much trauma, too much inflammation, we're going to turn on the bad gene.
Bullshit.
If we have enough of those turned on, it's going to wreak havoc in our body. That's why just because we have these DNA mutations doesn't mean that every single one of us are walking around with heart disease and lung disease and all of these things. It's because we have that good copy also.
Here's the thing about mutations, and this you'll learn in basic biology. Mutations, a small part are beneficial, a small part are harmful, most are benign.
You ever heard of recessive genes?
Yes.
That children can die from? That's because they have 2 bad copies.
Okay, now she does make a point there, and it's not necessarily a quote-unquote bad gene. I'll give the example of cystic fibrosis, and I learned this thanks to Baba Brinkman. I'm going to give him a little bit of a shout-out for this. But I didn't know this, but one of the genes that comes, when you have someone with cystic fibrosis, it means both the parents carry this certain genetic, I'm not going to necessarily call it a defect, but this adaptation. And what it does when a parent carries, when you carry one copy of this gene, it makes the person less susceptible to tuberculosis. So that is a positive. That was a positive adaptation along the evolutionary chain. If you happen to have this one copy of this gene, you had a higher resistance to tuberculosis. However, if both parents have this same gene and that both of them pass it on to the child, the two copies of that gene combined cause cystic fibrosis. So she's got a point here, but unfortunately she's taking it down the wrong path.
We have the ability to identify 15 specific pathways that are important for the body's health and function.
Oh, she gave a long list too.
So any genetic variant at any one of these pathways can affect how we detoxify, recycle certain vitamins and minerals, how we create energy, and how we recycle hormones. A genetic SNP is called a single nucleotide polymorphism. It's literally like we took a pair of scissors, we snipped off one of these, and we replaced it with something abnormal. A subtle DNA sequence variation can affect how we make those enzymes. And then that creates that enzyme that is unable to do its job. So SNPs do not cause diseases. Most are inconsequential, but some have disease-causing potential.
This much is true, and I'm pulling here off of the Genetic Home Reference out of the U.S. National Library of Medicine. I'm going to read the last thing here about these SNPs. She calls them SNPs, or they're SNPs. Most SNPs have no effect on health or overall development. Some of these genetic differences, however, have proven to be very important in the study of human health. Some of them. Researchers have found SNPs that may help predict an individual's response to certain drugs, susceptibility to environmental factors such as toxins, and risk development in particular diseases. Yes, they talk about these toxins too. Let's see. Future studies will work to identify SNPs associated with complex diseases such as heart disease, diabetes, and cancer. So right now they're seeing them, but they have no idea what they need to do, how these affect, or what they can do to correct them. So her saying that her and her chiropractic practice can do this is total bullshit too. But again, back to the speaker.
Because of the load, the stress that occurs over time. Multiple SNPs can cause bigger problems. That's why we look at the whole picture. Those 15 that we identified, we don't just target one of them. We look at all 15 in a step-by-step sequence and figure out how we can improve the body's ability to detoxify itself, recycle its hormones. These are actually the 15 genetic SNPs that they've identified that really wreak havoc on our body. Has anyone heard of methylation? Right? Has anyone heard of, okay, so here's an important one. Free radicals. Do we know why some people are more inflamed than other people?
Because
their body's ability to detoxify itself. These
bullshit.
are the 15 pathways that really create this perfect storm.
Okay, I have to call bullshit there. It's not that their bodies have a problem detoxifying themselves. In a lot of cases, it's because their immune systems are having some issues. Okay, like for instance, psoriasis. Eczema is one deal, but with psoriasis in particular, something else that I personally have experience with. It's actually an immune disease that the body's immune system starts to see your own skin cells as an invader or as harmful, and begins to attack them. And then in response, the body, your skin, starts to create more skin cells in order to keep up with your immune system, breaking them down. And that's where you develop these plaques and the scaly, almost very nasty looking dandruff alligator skin. That's what happens. In some cases, it also starts to attack the immune system also starts to attack joints, and that's where you get psoriatic arthritis. It's not because the body can't detoxify itself. It's because the body's immune system has gone into overdrive.
So why is methylation so important? It's funny because methylation is step 13 and 14 down here. But this really controls our body's ability to detoxify itself. Mutations in this pathway have the capability to impair all three major disease-causing pathways: infection, toxicity, and stress. So methylation cycle mutations lead to chronic infectious diseases, increased environmental toxin burden, and then they have the secondary effect of damaging our DNA, causing more mutations as we go. Okay?
I doubt it.
Methylation is where we take a carbon and 3 hydrogens, and we attach it to other things. That's how our body is able to break down substances and eliminate them from the body. So if we're not able to methylate, we're not able to get rid of heavy metals, we're not able to get rid of and recycle our hormones, we're not able to recycle our serotonin, our dopamine, our feel-good hormones. The functions of methylation: they turn off and on good genes, they detoxify, they build metabolites like neurotransmitters, the norepinephrine, the epinephrine. They process hormones like estrogen, cortisol, and insulin. It builds immune cells, DNA synthesis and repair, energy production, myelin covering. Does everyone know what myelin is? It's that little sheath that covers every single one of our nerves. And then it builds and maintains cell membranes. That's the membrane that surrounds our cell that allows us to have things come in and exit the cell. Methylation can be disturbed by a lack of the cofactors: zinc, B12, magnesium, B6. The medications, these medications can wreak havoc on our methylation cycle. Obviously, not a lot of kids are on this, but metformin is a huge one. And then specific nutrient-depleting methyl groups, high doses of niacin can do this. Environmental toxins, heavy metals, and chemicals. And then excessive end products. SAMe is something that will feed back into the methylation cycle and make it go too fast. Mental stress, and then the genetic mutations that we just talked about. So this can result in cardiovascular disease, thyroid dysfunction, neurological or around the brain inflammation, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, neurotransmitter imbalances, cancer, aging, schizophrenia, digestive issues, decreased repair tissue, and the list goes on and on and on and on and on.
I bet it does.
Okay, so do you kind of see a repeating theme here? Here, 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 here.
Yeah, you're kind of trying to scare us.
Disorders, right? Inflammation, swelling, pressure, trauma around the brain and the spinal cord. So, attention deficit or hyperactivity disorder is one of the most common brain, spinal cord, neurobehavioral disorder.
Okay, neuro, brain, and spinal cord. Brain, yes. Spinal cord, what the fuck are you talking about?
Disorders of children. It is sometimes referred to as ADD. It usually first diagnosed in childhood. It often lasts into adulthood. Children with ADHD may have trouble paying attention, controlling impulsive behaviors. They may act without thinking, or they can be overly active. The overly active part is what, you guys know this, it's what takes out ADD versus ADHD. Okay? This is being overdiagnosed for...
No, it's just we've figured out better ways to diagnose it.
For a couple of different reasons. I think nowadays children are required more to be still, to be obedient, to be, and so the cycle starts with teachers.
Have you been into a classroom recently? Kids don't sit still that much.
And usually that's the first person that identifies it. Sometimes parents do, sometimes they're worried about their child. But there's definitely an increase in toxic load.
No, there's not.
Environmental toxins, the things that we're eating, the things that we're putting on our skin, and then this increase in methylation defects, which then speeds up the process.
No, and no. ADHD is caused in many cases, not all cases, but in many cases it's because the specific centers of the specific part of the brain that controls attention span, that controls your higher mental functions like impulse control, is just millimeters, just a little bitty bit smaller than it is in most people. And because it's just that little bit smaller, there are less dopamine receptors in there to be able to, to handle the load. And so they don't pay attention as much because their brains physically can't. It's not because the environmental toxins did this or that. It's just something that happens. It's genetic. It's passed on through the family. I have it. My dad probably has it. I'm pretty sure some folks on my mom's side of the family have it. My son has it. My daughter might have it. I don't know yet. She's still a little young to be able to diagnose that kind of shit. But, like I said, it is a brain disorder, but it's not caused by environmental fucking toxins.
Some signs of ADHD, if they have trouble focusing, they don't usually grow out of these behaviors. We all hear of like the terrible 2 stage. They don't tend to grow out of it. The symptoms continue at school, at home, or with friends. They daydream, they forget or lose things, they squirm, fidget, talk too much, make careless mistakes, blah, 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 blah. So the criteria for these diseases are kind of loose.
No, they're not. You're looking at, these are the warning signs that you look for to take them to the doctor. And then the doctor has a much more precise criteria than just what you've just talked about, okay? When they diagnosed my son with ADHD, when they had diagnosed myself with ADHD, there was this big long questionnaire list that I had to go through, and that we had to go through with him. We had to supply my pediatrician with 2 years of my son's schoolwork. We had to fill out a big long form about his behavior and how he reacted in certain things. His teacher had to fill out another form that asked how he was performing in class. And the doctor takes all of these together along with examination, talking to him, checking his memory, checking to see if maybe it's some other problems like possibly to rule out things like dyslexia, or other learning disabilities before they come up with the diagnosis. It's not just, oh, you're not paying attention as much, we've got ADHD, here's some medicine. They don't do that.
Does everyone agree with that?
No.
So, I've heard a lot of patients come through and their child has either been diagnosed with autism or ADD or ADHD, or it's still getting thrown around that they may have one of those, but we haven't been able to narrow it down. It's because the criteria for these is ever changing, and it's very, very hard to diagnose a child. Okay. The current treatments for these conditions are risperidone.
No.
It's an antipsychotic medication.
What the fuck? No. Again, risperidone, no, that's not a first line. First line is you start with things like Ritalin and Adderall, the stimulants. You start with the stimulants because, as I said a few minutes ago, with that spot being just a little bit smaller and there not being as many receptors, and there's not as many synapses being able to fire in that area, we don't pay attention as well. So you give them a stimulant that speeds up the brain synapses, and in someone who has a healthy functioning brain, it causes like maybe a 5%, a 5% increase in attention and such that they found. You give it to a kid with ADHD and it's like night and day, because when those synapses are firing faster, it brings them up closer to what a normal level is. It brings them up closer to that normal attention span. So that's why you start with, you don't start with Risperdal. No. They may have 20 years ago. No, they don't do that now. You start with those. There's a few other new medications that have come out. Wellbutrin is another one that they try, but no, they don't start with that shit.
It's FDA approved for behavioral disorders between the ages of 5 and 17. Once again, they will prescribe this for tantrums, aggression, self-injury.
No.
But they will also prescribe it for the more common symptoms: fidgeting, daydreaming, can't pay attention, can't focus. Side effects of this include weight gain or an increased appetite. They can be sedation, constipation, fatigue. They can cause insulin resistance, which later in life is a precursor to diabetes. Okay, we're starting this medication on our...
Okay, now you see, this is starting the fear tactics. They went and grabbed the worst medication that they could get, the worst medications that they could give, which are usually last line if all of the other shit has not worked. But she's starting with that to scare you. To scare you away from medication. Medication is not a bad thing if your child needs it. I cannot stress this enough. Okay, if your child has a bacterial infection, you have no problem giving them an antibiotic for a bacterial infection. You have most smart people have no problem giving their kids a vaccine to prevent certain diseases like measles, mumps, rubella, etc. Giving medication for mental disorders like this is no different, okay? These things have been studied forever. Methylphenidate has been around since the 60s. That's Ritalin, in case you all didn't understand that. Before that, there were other stimulants that they tried, but they found Ritalin is probably one of the better ones to use. They have used these for years. ADHD right now is probably one of the most studied neurological issues on the planet. People have been digging into this thing literally forever. Okay, they were noticing ADHD symptoms in kids as far back as the 16th century. Okay, they didn't name it until the 70s, but you could go through and see these different type of behavioral disorders and such when they started treating kids with behavioral problems in the 30s and started treating them with these stimulants, kind of like they were with the soldiers. That's when they discovered this part of it, and eventually it became known as ADHD. They came with an actual, diagnosis for the specific thing. But the stimulants have been used for a long time. If used properly, there are very few side effects. In fact, what they have found is kids that do not get treated for their ADHD have more problems when they become adults. They're more likely to get arrested. They're more likely to go from job to job. They're more likely to have drug and alcohol addiction problems because they're trying to self-medicate. All of these symptoms. Kids that were actually treated with these and treated properly don't have those problems.
Our young children. And I haven't heard a lot of the times that the side effects are really any better than the benefits of the medicine.
Really?
Other medications that they use are SSRIs.
Again, if the stimulants and other stuff don't work.
Stand for? Serotonin reuptake. Remember we just talked about methylation? It controls our serotonin cycles.
There we go again.
Tricyclics, psychoactive or antipsychotic medications. They'll give tristimulants, Ritalin. They'll try
Ritalin is not an antipsychotic. Why are you lumping it in with that?
And they'll now try anti-convulsion medications.
And they do work.
It's like this, once again, perfect storm of let's add another one. Let's see which combination of medications can keep them under control.
Oh my God, because maybe if one thing works, if one thing doesn't work, we need to try something else. Holy shit.
So the difference between that and this model is identifying those genetic mutations.
Bullshit.
Those genetic mutations that child is going to carry for the rest of their life, but depending on how we supplement them and how we support them, we can turn off the bad gene and turn the good one back on.
Bullshit.
Okay? This is how we talk about the roots of the tree and the thing that's feeding that disease instead of talking about the leaves and trying to control the symptoms.
Yeah, because when you have a disease, you try to treat the symptoms to alleviate the symptoms. That's the whole thing about treating a disease.
Right?
And for another thing, ADHD is not a symptom. It is a disease. Actually, I wouldn't even know if I could call it a disease. It's an adaptation.
This genetic kit actually comes from 23andMe.
And here's where she's plugging the $400 kit.
If you've heard about 23andMe, their big claim to fame is ancestry. They can connect you with your DNA relatives. They can show you where you came from. I don't care about any of that. The cool thing about this company is that I can access your child's raw data off of the website. The raw data will tell me those SNPs, that single nucleotide change, and it will tell me how efficiently those 15 enzymes are working that control those pathways. And if they're not working correctly, eventually lead to disease processes.
Okay, I'm just real quick before she goes on with this. I may just go ahead and cut it off here because we're running a bit long. She does go a lot more into plugging this genetic testing so that they can get you the right supplement so that we can make sure that you're detoxifying, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But this is from an article by Dr. Stephen Novella on his Science-Based Medicine blog. If you don't know who Dr. Stephen Novella is, he is a neuroscientist. He teaches at Yale University. He's a neurologist. And he also is one of the hosts of Skeptic's Guide to the Universe. I highly recommend his podcast, and I do recommend, if you get a chance, pick up on the great courses. He has a whole course on medical myths. It is a wonderful thing. But this is from Science-Based Medicine, dated October 23rd of 2016. So this is fairly recent. The title is Genetic Testing, Does Knowing the Risk of Disease Make a Difference? And as we pull down here, current risk predictions are imprecise and are based on assumptions. He says in here, we can't be sure that the high-risk gene variants cause disease. All we really know is that a variant was statistically associated with a disease in the particular population tested, and correlation does not prove causation. That is a steadfast rule. Just because things correlate doesn't mean that that's the cause. Just because you didn't change your underwear for 3 games in a row and you hit in baseball and you hit home runs all 3 of those games doesn't mean that not changing your underwear is going to make you hit a home run. Same thing here. Many diseases are multifactorial. The expression of one gene may be affected by other genes and by environmental and lifestyle factors. Having a gene associated with a disease does not mean you will get the disease. The most it might do is increase the probability. And conversely, having variants associated with low risk is no guarantee you won't get the disease. Let's see. Oh, and he's even got a little thing about SNPs in here. Let's see. And the different companies don't even agree with each other. They assess risk using different combinations of SNPs, which we talked about, which she talks about in there. To assess prostate cancer risk, the different companies test for 5, 13, and 9 variants respectively, but no company tests for all 16 variants known to be correlated with increased risk. So are we there yet? And here's the take-home. For genetic testing in general and for assessing risks of various diseases, many experts have asked, are we there yet? And we have concluded that we are not. Okay? The New England Journal of Medicine is one of them. The British Medical Journal. All of these folks are saying that this is only one systematic analysis of low-quality studies. It's certainly not the final word. It does, however, strongly suggest that if genetic risk predictions are effective in changing behaviors, the effect must be rather small. That ties in with another article about prevention. Of course, as we were talking about, the whole, that's the one thing that functional medicine that they talk about does have going for it. It does stress healthy eating. It does stress, lifestyle changes, diet, exercise, those things that the doctors are always telling you about. These things are what we talk about. But when it comes to ADHD and autism, all of the supplements in the world are not going to treat it, okay? It's not going to. You could sit and give them detox after detox after detox and supplement them with everything under the sun, and it's not going to make a difference. So how do I rate this? I say she's full of shit. I'm sure, listening to her, I'm sure she believes this. And I'm sure some of the people that were sitting in there, in the thing with me, believed it. And again, like I said, I have spent 6 hours going through, researching some of the things that she pointed on to get the correct information so that when I started recording the show, I could get those out for you. 6 hours for a 30-minute talk. And that's for somebody that kind of knows what they're doing. That's for someone that is of a skeptical bent and already has a little bit of an understanding of how these things work. For the average Joe on the street, especially with our average, knowledge of science in this country, there's no way you're not going to fall for this. So and I think that was one of the takeaways for me, is that, we keep talking and I hear, I'm guilty of it and other podcasts out there are guilty of it too. How can they believe this bullshit? Well, after sitting through that, actually sitting and listening to this, and it took me 6 hours to come up with the data to back up my claims that she was full of shit, it's no wonder that people are falling for this bullshit. Okay? It's no wonder. And again, I want to stress for anybody out there that may think that chiropractics, think that it's a good thing, and it, you may have personal stories. I know I've got friends that have personal stories about how chiropractic is the only thing that has helped their headaches, or it's the only thing that's helped this pain or that pain. I understand. I understand that it worked for you in some way. It may just be you have to understand too that this may just be a placebo effect. You can't be, and Dr. Novella talks about this in one of his classes, or in one of the great courses things. You can't be certain that it was that one thing that the chiropractor did that fixed it. You have to factor in the placebo effect, factor in other things that you were doing along with this that may have helped. You don't know for sure. You can't know on your own that the chiropractor is what helped. Okay? And I know it's very hard to discount personal experience. That's one of the hardest things in the world for someone that's debating to fight against. Is anybody who's debated a Christian that says, well, Jesus got me off of the drugs and alcohol, knows. It's very hard to, because what do you say? You can't not validate the experience, because yes, you had an experience. Yes, you went to the chiropractor and it helped, and it seemed to help, but you can't know for certain. And that's all I'm getting at here. As far as the studies go, they show that chiropractic is maybe just a little bit less than a good physical therapist as far as results go. So instead of handing that money to a chiropractor that's going to be selling some of this detox stuff, I mean, she was selling things to adjust your pH. You don't need to adjust your pH. Really. Your body can do that on its own. Different cleanses. You don't need these cleanses. You really don't. If your liver is working fine, if you have a healthy liver, you don't need this stuff. You don't need to overload yourself on these vitamins and these vitamin supplements and other things, because a lot of times they're showing, a lot of the studies are showing that it doesn't work like they say it does. And especially with ADHD and autism and things like that, you need to talk to a real professional. Okay? You have to talk to somebody that has studied these things, and for God's sake, if they need medicine, get it for them. Okay? That's all I'm going to give for tonight. I hope that, I hope it's been a good night for everybody. I hope this has been somewhat educational. I know it's different from my normal shows. I'm going to try to go back to our regular format next week. In 2 weeks, I'm going to have, let me go to my schedule here on the calendar. And I believe, let's see, I know in 2 weeks I'm going to have David Fitzgerald on to talk about his new books, Jesus, Mything in Action. He's a mythist. He, of course, is a mythicist, like myself. He does not really believe in a historical Jesus, and he gives some pretty good reasons why. Okay, next week I'm going to be talking with Rob and Amy from Secular Yakking, and then David Fitzgerald. And after that, I'm working up getting some folks on, and we'll have to see from there. Again, starting next week, the show is going to move to pre-recorded and on Tuesdays instead of Monday. Until we meet again, I just want to say, believe nothing that you hear, half of what you see, and never, 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 never start a serious conversation without a 2-drink minimum. Good night, everybody.
To Anacreon in heaven, where he sat in full glee, a few sons of harmony sent a petition that he their inspirer and patron would be. When this answer arrived from the jolly old Grecian, voice, fiddle, and flute no longer be mute. I'll lend you my name and inspire you to boot, and besides I'll instruct you like me to entwine the myrtle of Venus with Bacchus's vine, and Besides, I'll instruct you like me to entwine the